This is my 1997 Dodge Ram 3500 that is slowly becoming more rust than truck at the moment. The rusty body and terrible paint make this truck embarrassing to be seen in, so I'm going to transform it from its current state as a driving tetanus factory to something that is slightly less embarrassing. My first step in getting this truck to look nice is going to be to fix all the rust. And the rust on the rocker panels and on the side of the cab is pretty extensive. And I am no body guy, but I have just enough knowledge to get myself in trouble with a welder. So I'm going to give this a shot and go ahead and see what happens. Now I've gone ahead and ordered myself a new rocker panel as well as a new cab corner. So that will be what I use to replace the sheet metal here. And just because I have this entire piece doesn't mean that I have to use all of it. I'm going to try and save as much of the original truck as possible, but obviously that might be easier said than done, and it might just be easier to just replace a lot of the original truck. But I'm going to do my best, and now let's start cutting some of this stuff out. Batteries disconnected for safety, and there's 2 of them. Diving head first into this massive project, the first part of the truck that gets to meet the death wheel is the rocker panel. As I start cutting open the panel, we get to see the severity of the rust, and when it comes to rust on vehicles, the rule is that it's always worse than it looks, and the rule is definitely followed here. Alright, I have roughly cut out kind of where I want to have the replacement sheet metal. My next step is to deal with these kind of rust holes, because this may not show up on camera, but there is a pinhole through that. And then this is also probably not going to be super thick. But my next step is, this is all spot welded at the bottom here. So I'm going to go ahead and drill out these spot welds and pull off this, because our new sheet metal does have that bottom. Man, that factory spot weld is pretty terrible. For drilling out these spot welds, I'm just using the spot weld cutter from Harbor Freight, which is cheap and pretty effective. After cutting the spot welds, I just chisel apart the layers of sheet metal using a cheap chisel. Well, at least I'm consistent on drilling too far into the metal. Alright, so I have all of the metal cut out for the most part of the outer part of this rocker panel. Now on this inner sheet metal, I can see pinholes starting to show up as I'm grinding away with the wire wheel. And this section right here also has a bunch of pinholes in it. So I really think my best course of action right now is going to be to cut from just about here to here along this kind of line where we have clean sheet metal, and then this will have to get cut out as well. Most of the sketchy metal is cut out. Just gotta do this section. Now it's time to just create a template out of cardboard, which then we can use to transfer that onto a piece of new sheet metal and then weld it all in. Here's the final fitment of the patch panel, which just needs to be cleaned up in order to be welded in. For those that are curious on the setup, the machine that I'm using is a ESAB Rebel 215 using pretty standard 75-25 argon CO2 mix. Everyone on the internet is somehow a professional welder, so go ahead and judge the final product on this patch panel. As far as I'm concerned, these welds are stronger than rust. Well, I thought the metal was a bit more solid up there than it really was. And it just kind of blew right through, so I'm going to have to deal with that. And I dealt with that off camera, so you just have to trust me that I did a good job. Everything got covered with some weld through primer, and basically all the metal on the car is going to get a coat of this stuff. Now it's time to get a template for the section of the rocker panel. I'm just going to use some tape to get a good measurement of the width of this section, and also use the tape to help me cut some straight lines. Our panel is pretty decent in terms of length. And so now I'm going to go ahead and cut and trim off this top part, because the metal here is actually still good. So I'm just going to make a straight cut off of here, and then I'm going to mark it on this, clean it all up, and we should have some pretty good edges to align. Alright, good enough. Gives us plenty to work with on the top. Now just zap it off. Now we just gotta trim off this top piece, and then we'll prep the panels for welding, and they'll be good to go. Using this method of using the final patch panel as a template to trace off is a really good way of ensuring good fitment. If you cut it correctly, there should be a gap about the width of the cutting blade that is perfect to fill in with the welder. That will help create a seamless transition between the two pieces of sheet metal. If the metal overlapped, you'd see an obvious step in the final product. The last step in getting this new rocker panel zapped in is to draw out the holes for plug welding. If you have a spot welder, you can use that as well. But plug welding also works if you can't justify spending more money on tools to your wife. I have a set of plug welding pliers that I ordered off of Amazon that are much cheaper than a spot welding machine, and it makes it super easy to do the plug welds since it holds the two layers of metal tightly and also has a copper backing that doesn't stick to your welds. Here you can see it in action. That part of the metal probably wasn't super clean, but you know what? We're just gonna run it. And it's that time of the video again for the professional welders to tell me that my work is literally going to be weaker than the structural rust I just replaced. I've gone ahead and started to grind down a little bit of the welds, and honestly, my work is not perfect, but I'm not going for perfection. And I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of the finish work later on, once all the other welding is done, and so I can just do all the finish work at once. But I think this is good enough, and we have a pretty decent solution, and the rest is gone. Now, we're going to tackle this. Alright, for this section of the car, I'm going to start by cutting this part out, but I think I'm eventually just going to cut all the way across here, where the end of this dent is, because I'd rather just put new sheet metal there than try and actually do body work. So, that might be the easiest course for me. Let's cut this out and see how far back the rest goes. Alright, this is not looking good here. There should be metal here to here. So we're going to cut out a lot more until we stop seeing rust. And this was the back of that piece of metal that we cut. And you can see this is all scaly and rusty. We can see this is what I cut out from this massive piece, and we have scaling all the way around on the bottom. So it's going to be a good thing that we're just going to chop it all off here. We have plenty of sheet metal to work with, so I'm not worried about it. And I'm more worried about this because I don't have a replacement panel for this, so I'll have to try and fab it up myself, and we'll see how that goes. The amount of rust that I found after cutting open the cab corner was surprising to say the least, and just goes to show that it's always worse than it looks from the outside. Every time I thought it was over, I just found more. It's like opening an advent calendar, except every door is just more rust. Alright, this should be pretty solid, but oh no. And it just keeps getting worse. Oh. That's all from inside of here. And it keeps getting worse. A moment of silence for what was once a part of my truck. And with that over, it's time to clean up the rusty metal. Everything in here gets a coat of the weld-through primer, and now we can finally start making the patch panels. First patch panel is literally just a square, so that's easy enough to make. And that is our square done, so now it's time to move on to something more complex. I'm going to be using my same tape method again to accurately get the size of the hole and translate that into a flat piece of metal. Alright, I've transferred my tape template to cardboard, and I'm kind of happy with how this looks like. We'll have to maybe trim it up a little bit on the top here, but I think this will work. And I'm going to try and reuse one of the other pieces of metal that already has this flange on the bottom, so that way I don't have to make this flange, and then we'll be good. And with some percussive persuasion, with the help of the existing structure, I was able to get the correct contour for the patch. And here's basically the final product of what's going on. I will grind down these things. That way we can start working on this section. Patch panel will look something like this. My patch panel did not look like that template that I made. I was running out of skill since the original sheet metal had multiple curves that were getting tough to reproduce. If I had more time, I could probably have 3D printed a die to use on the press to get the shape correct, but no one is going to see this part of the truck, and it'll just be our little secret. This is more or less the final product. This gap here needs to get filled in, but we'll deal with that later. Now I just need to grind everything down here so this outer skin will actually fit over everything nicely, and then work on this part. This is the part that was tough to make as one piece. Running out of skill and time, I decided that it would be easier just to make it out of multiple pieces and then just weld them all together. And this is more or less what I came up with. I have finished welding up everything around here, and for this I made kind of like a series of pie cuts, and I put a piece of metal behind it and then welded it all together. And then for this, I just kind of welded right on top of where I missed. So that's going to be how it is. Now hopefully everything works okay, and I can put the outer skin over all this. Alright, so I've repaired everything on the truck on the inside, and now it's time to put on this outer skin. And I have this big panel that is more than what I need, so I'm going to cut out the panel, trim it down, lay it over top, and then trace over it, so that way I'll cut everything where I traced, and then we'll have a perfect fitment. Allegedly, that's how it's supposed to go. We'll see how that works. Just like that, we have our first kind of line to cut out. We'll get like that. Should be good enough. Our panel kind of fits over everything. Doesn't seem too bad. So I'll go ahead and clamp it into place. And I might cut out a little bit more of this spot and here, so I don't have to take out this thing. But otherwise, I think that's pretty good. Time to trace it out, make the final cut, and then we'll be ready to zap it in place. This is going to be essentially the final resting place of the panel. Panel is all kind of tacked up into place, so now I'm going to be doing the whole thing more or less, and some light beading on this corner, but otherwise looking pretty good. And anything we mess up, we'll just cover with Bondo. Finally finished up all the welding on this panel. Now I'm going to go ahead and start the long process of grinding everything down. That way we can start with the filler work and actually get the paint done. Alright, I've gone ahead and ground down all the welds along the panel and went ahead and also sprayed it with some primer so that way nothing here starts to rust immediately. So it's time for some Bondo work to cover up all of our imperfections, and there's plenty of imperfections. I never claimed to be an expert, so I'm just a dude in his garage or in his driveway that tries to do this for free and as cheap as possible. The idea is not perfection, we just want it to be somewhat reasonable so that it's not obvious when you look at it 20 feet away. And here are some of the imperfections. The professional panel beaters can roast me in the comments down below for making such easily preventable mistakes. But this is something we can just kind of hide and cover up with some Bondo. Alright, my first step here is going to be cleaning up the work area with 80 grit sandpaper. I'm just going to be using this orbital sander for now. Eventually I will be using a block sander, but to get all the rough work and do it faster, I'm going to be using this 80 grit. Alright, I've got the panel all the way down to bare metal, so now I'm going to use rubbing alcohol to clean it up, get rid of all the dust and dirt and whatever else can be on here. This body filler said on the can that it should be applied over bare metal, so that is what I'm doing. I've read that spraying an epoxy primer before using the filler can help prevent any corrosion happening between the filler and metal. But I guess I'll be the first person to let you know when the body filler flakes off in a couple of years, so stay tuned for that video. Now I'm starting to kind of overwork it, and I can tell it's getting stiffer. So I'm just going to let that dry, come back in like 20 minutes or so, what the can says, and then we'll sand it down and see what happened. So after some sanding and Bondo work, this is kind of what we have. Threw a little primer on it. It looks pretty decent, and you would never know this was all missing at one point. This fender is absolutely cooked, and same thing with the other side. We have a lot of rust on the top here, and it's missing a lot down at the bottom. So I'm going to replace it. That's going to be a bit easier than trying to patch up this rusty mess. So I'll be replacing this fender with this one, just like that. And we got to undo a bunch of spot welds, and then zap it all in, and it'll be fine. All right, let's get started. Next, we have to take off this inner fender liner, and there's a bunch of clips all the way around. And in my case, I have one zip tie holding it in. Alright, next we gotta take out essentially everything that is attached to the fender here. So that means we need to take out the battery box, and some of the loose grounds and connectors and so on and so forth. And since I have a dual battery setup, I'm going to disconnect the other side as well. Alright, batteries are disconnected. We can start working on getting them out of the way. Alright, inside look at the battery box. We have 2 bolts on top, one here, one here. Oh god, fucking wasp. Wasp, chill. And we have 2 nuts to undo right there. And then there might be another one somewhere, but I think that's it. These ones on the top should be 13s. And same thing with these at the bottom. Battery box also has 2 nuts on the bottom here. And we have some clips on the bottom of this for some reason. Alright, last thing we kind of need to do to prep the area is to unclip the harness from this side and then also unplug the headlights. I'm actually going to remove my front headlight because it's actually going to be easier for me to remove all the spot welds from this area. There's just 2 bolts, one here and then one way in there, and then this thing will just kind of pull out. We do have a lot of bolts to undo on the top there, but I'm going to leave that for now, and instead I'm going to cut out this stuff. And that is because this whole inner seam is spot welded in place and we need to be able to reach it, and I just want to reach it comfortably because I'm already going to be replacing this panel and everything inside here is probably already super rusty anyways. So I'm just going to cut it off, make it super easy to reach. These are all the spot welds we have to drill out, and so now you can see why it was so much easier just to cut everything out. And you're probably thinking, hey, why don't you use something like this, a little 90-degree adapter for your drill? But mine is actually broken. You see it doesn't spin, and it actually broke doing the other side, so that's why it's easier to do this. You might have different luck than me. Now it's time to actually drill out all 30-something spot welds. That is 1 spot weld drilled out. Now to do like 30 more. More death wheel action to reach the spot welds around the headlight. And we can see that everything was pretty gross anyways. Pretty much got all the spot welds drilled out, except for one down there, and we'll deal with that later. But now it is time to mess with all of these bolts. We have 3 10mm bolts up here. Alright, we have 2 13mm bolts up top here. Alright, next we have 2 13mm bolts right here. And now we actually have a bunch of bolts down here on the core support. So we took the bolts out, but it's still connected down here because it's still spot welded to the inner fender. So we'll have to do those either from the bottom or from the top. You can probably get it from the top. And there's one more bolt. And the last bolt is down here. Down here is where it's spot welded in 5 places, 2 in each little tab here and 1 right in the middle. I'm also going to get rid of these ground cables to get some more space. And there's very limited space for me to film, so you're just going to have to trust that I get these out from the top here. Next, I just beat off the panel and then pulled it right off. The one area that I really messed up is down here, and that was really just hard to get to, but that can be fixed. Next step is just going to be cleaning up this edge here, straightening it out, and allowing us to weld on it. Goddamn wasp. Alright, got that pretty straight. Straight enough to be usable. Now I just gotta fix the down there. To fix the part that I damaged, I cut off the damaged portion and then used it as a template. Then burned the new piece into place. Switching it up a little bit, I ran out of shielding gas, so I'm running flux core, so we're just gonna run it. See what happens. Damn it, already burned through a little bit. Well, and after a little bit of grinding, I think that's not too bad. And we're about ready to just kind of paint everything up. And just like all the other panels we've seen, it's time to drill more holes for plug welds. And a quick treatment of weld through primer. With all that prep work done, we can finally work on getting the new fender into place and lining it up. something like that. We have to align the inner fender, and that's going to be the hardest part, and then getting all the bolts in. So I'm going to mess around with this, and we'll come back when it's all kind of set up. Inner fender is mostly aligned. The hardest part is getting this to sit on top, and then this has to kind of go underneath it and then sit there. It's not super close right now, but also nothing is bolted in, so I'm gonna lightly thread in all the bolts, and then we can finish all the fitment. The key here is to lightly thread in all the bolts, that way there is still some wiggle room for final adjustments. Got the fender all in place, all the bolts are in place as well, and our inner fender is pretty well lined up. So now we can go ahead and start welding and get this in for good. Alright, it is still the weekend, and so I don't have any gas to use, so I'm going to try this with the flex core and see what happens. I think it's going to stick, so now it's just time to do it all the way around. After plug welding everything, the panel is finally in place. Keep in mind that this is an aftermarket panel, and it will most likely take some persuasion for it to line up properly. After I finished welding, I added some seam sealer around all the gaps to help keep water out of the seams. That should keep the truck alive for longer. And if you're wondering, I did the exact same thing on the other side. This is what it looks like with the headlight in place after some primer. Now that we got the new fender on, and all the bodywork has been completed for the most part, it's time to prep the car for paint. So I'm going to take off all the trim, everything that's going to be in the way and that I don't want painted. So let's go ahead and start taking that apart. Almost everything on the outside of the truck is going to get taken off. This includes the badges, any moldings on the side, lights, and rubber seals. Really the only thing I didn't take off was the door handles, since I was running out of time, as evidenced by the trees no longer being green behind me. This inner door panel is only coming off so that I can remove the mirrors, but when doing so, I made an interesting discovery. Something has been living in here. Time to get evicted. This truck has always had the mouse version of Dirty Mike and the boys living inside it since I've owned it. In the next video on this truck, I'll be doing some more mouse evictions from the HVAC system to hopefully get rid of them for good. And here's a final look of my naked truck. I've stripped down the car as much as I want to go, and now it's going to be time to sand everything. So I'm going to be using just the sander and just rough up all the paint and get rid of most of the rust that's on here, and then we should be ready to just kind of do the rest of the paint prep. But now it's time to talk a little bit about the expectations. I am not expecting to do a 100% frame off restoration or something that's going to be even better than the factory. I just don't have the time for that, or frankly the skills. So we're going to be doing something like the 80% solution. It's going to be great about 20 feet away, and once you go up to it, it's going to be a little bad. But I don't care that much. All right, I'm going to start in the door, and now it's just time to sand everything.
One eternity later.
Sanding down this truck was absolutely my least favorite thing to do during this project. It took my whole weekend since this truck is so massive, and a lot of areas had to go down to bare metal since there was surface rust poking through. I rate this a 2 out of 10, would not do again. After many hours of sanding and prep work, it is time to mask everything off, and for me to show you what I'm going to finally paint this with, and that is going to be implement paint. Specifically from Tractor Supply, I'm going to paint this gray, all one color. I'm not going to keep the two-tone. The reason why is because, again, this is not a show truck. This is actually going to be put to work, and it should be pretty easy to work with. And I have probably just enough imperfections in here that it might help hide everything, hopefully. I have a bunch of masking tape and some of these plastic drop cloths, so time to start the long and annoying process of taping up. The truck has changed colors already because I didn't want to leave bare metal exposed when it started to rain almost immediately after I finished sanding. And you're just going to see this when it's done. And a couple hours later, we have everything taped off. Everything's masked off, so now I'm going to use some acetone and a clean microfiber, wipe everything down, and get the paint set up. Oh, god damn it. This reducer, which I need to run through my spray gun, says 8-to-1 ratio, so there's a 7-to-1 ratio on here, which is close enough. Alright, I think that's enough. Now, close this up before I have more spills. Mix this up, throw it in the gun, and we get to go. The spray gun that I'm using is the cheapest one from Harbor Freight, but I don't know if I would recommend it for use with this primer and implement paint. The primer came out with a lot of texture, and I'm not sure if the spray tip was the correct size or something else was wrong, but no matter what I did to try and adjust the gun, it still had a texture coming out with the primer. And at this point, I vowed to never sand this truck again, so I just ran with it. I probably could have gotten a better finished product if I just used the spray cans. And here's what the truck looked like after 2 coats of primer. I actually waited about a week between coats because I was reading that this primer really has to dry before doing it again. So that's what it took, especially now that it's cold outside. It's been a couple of days later and I've allowed the primer to fully dry. I have not gone ahead and sanded it because I just don't have the time or the patience to do that. So we're going to just apply our base coat and see how that happens. And I'm going to be using the reducer and the hardener as well because it is 55 degrees outside. It's pretty much outside of its working temperature. So we're going to see how well this works and hopefully it doesn't give us too many problems. The actual base coat seemed to spray onto the truck a lot easier than the primer did. If I were to do it again, I probably would have just used the base coat and avoided using the primer altogether. I'm not sure if it's actually worth the trouble putting it on. Unfortunately, I'll never know for sure if the primer was absolutely necessary. Maybe someone in the comments can give their experience with this type of paint. The base coat also got 2 coats of paint. I sprayed it on a little thick the second time to really make sure I didn't miss any spots. After the paint dried enough, it was time to put the truck back together, but when I first put the old lights on, I thought it looked a bit silly with the old fade-in lights and fresh paint, so I went all out and completely replaced all the lights on the truck. I went with smoked lights for everything because I thought it would look good with the dark accents and look really nice. The taillights, side markers, third brake light, cab lights, and headlights all got replaced. The old beat up chrome grille also got replaced with a black one. And finally, for some of my favorite final touches, the new badges. This new Cummins badge was something that I was extremely excited to put on, as to me it finally signified the end of all the bodywork and there was a light at the end of the tunnel for this truck. I even got a new badge for the cab, which really helps complete the look of this truck. With all that done, here's a look at our finished product. After spending 4 months of work, I now have a truck that I'm not embarrassed to be seen in. We have completed my transformation on the exterior of this truck, and I am really happy with how the results turned out. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. Is it great from like 20 feet away? Yes. And actually, your camera is sitting about 10 feet away, and on the camera, I'm sure this actually looks really amazing. But if you got up close to it, then it'd start showing some flaws. But I'm actually not entirely complete with the front end of this vehicle because I do want to replace the front bumper. Something more off-road oriented that I can put a winch on because I end up dragging pieces of junk into my yard all the time. So that is something I want to get done. And there are some weird weather seals and weather stripping that I also need to replace. But that will come later because right now it is time for me to actually enjoy the truck as it is and drive it around. And then we can finally get started on the other problems that this truck has. The next big project on this truck that I want to start is actually going to be on the interior of this truck. That's going to be replacing the dash, replacing the carpets, updating the headliner, replacing a bunch of things, all the broken plastic bits. All those things I want to fix on this truck so that way it's actually nice to be in as well as nice to look at. If you have enjoyed this video and want to catch more videos on this truck, go ahead and hit the like button, subscribe, let me know what you guys think about this truck down in the comments, because I will be reading every comment and you can roast me for my shoddy bodywork. So with that being said, I will see you next time.